My name is Rachel, and I just turned 29. For as long as I can remember, my birthday has been the one day each year my family somehow finds impossible to keep track of. While my brother Daniel gets celebrated like a hometown hero every time he breathes, this year I said nothing, reminded no one, and quietly used the inheritance my grandmother left only me to buy the mountain cabin I'd been dreaming about for years. When I posted one simple photo on a Sunday evening, my family's reaction told me everything I had always known but never been able to prove. I grew up in Cedarville, a mid-sized town in western Pennsylvania where everyone knew everyone, and reputations were built slowly over decades. Our house was a 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Drive, the kind of home that looked warm and inviting from the outside. With a wraparound porch and flower boxes my mother tended obsessively every spring. From the inside, it told a different story. My brother Daniel was the sun our family orbited. Everything else, including me, existed somewhere in the outer atmosphere. My father Gary spent 30 years as a civil engineer for the county. A quiet, disciplined man who expressed love through practicality rather than words. He coached Daniel's Little League teams, attended every one of his high school football games regardless of weather, and drove 4 hours each way to watch him compete in a regional debate tournament his junior year. When I placed second in my county science fair the same semester, my father nodded from across the kitchen and said, "Good job, kiddo," before asking Daniel if he wanted to run drills in the backyard. My mother, Diane, was the social architect of our family's image. She organized the neighborhood block parties, led the church fundraising committee, and documented every milestone in our lives through carefully curated photo albums. Daniel's albums filled 3 shelves in the living room. Mine sat in a single binder in the hall closet, last updated when I was 11. The difference in how they treated us became impossible to ignore on my 9th birthday. I woke up that Saturday morning already buzzing with excitement. I had circled the date on the kitchen calendar in red marker weeks before and mentioned it no fewer than a dozen times at dinner over the preceding week. By the time I padded downstairs in my pajamas, I fully expected at least streamers. Maybe a special breakfast, the kind of small fanfare my mother had given Daniel for his birthdays as far back as I could remember. Instead, I found the house empty. A note on the kitchen counter and my mother's handwriting read, "Rack, Daniel's travel team got a last-minute spot in the tournament in Erie. We had to leave early. There's cereal in the cabinet and money for pizza on the counter. We'll celebrate when we get back Sunday. Love, Mom." I still remember the casual shrug. That moment expected with no had me never dating in love. That the reason a celebration needed to be rescheduled was because today, the day they left, was my birthday. I ate cereal alone, watched cartoons, and cried quietly into a couch cushion so the neighbors wouldn't hear through the open window. They came back Sunday evening buzzing with energy, the whole car ride home apparently filled with replaying Daniel's best plays. My mother hugged me at the door and said she was exhausted. The promised celebration never happened. 2 weeks later, she handed me a gift card to a craft store with a sticky note that said, "Birthday, Zoe." I was 9 years old and already learning to lower my expectations. By the time I was 13, I had stopped bouncing down the stairs on my birthday entirely. I started keeping a small mental list of what each year looked like, not out of bitterness yet, but the way you document a pattern once you realize it's a pattern. When I turned 12, my parents were consumed with planning Daniel's high school graduation party, which happened to fall 3 days before my birthday. The graduation was legitimate cause for celebration. The part that stung was the way my birthday simply dissolved into the tail end of those festivities without anyone seeming to notice or care. My 16th birthday was the one I had held on to longest as a quiet hope. Sweet 16 felt like a cultural landmark, the kind of milestone even distracted parents would have to acknowledge. I didn't expect a big party. I had long since adjusted my expectations below that threshold. I just wanted dinner at a restaurant my family chose for me, a cake with my name on it. Maybe some acknowledgement that I had made it to 16 in one piece. That year, Daniel was in his 2nd semester of college and had started dating a girl named Brianna, who my parents adored immediately, with a devotion usually reserved for Olympic athletes. On the weekend of my birthday, my parents drove 3 hours to visit Daniel and meet Brianna's family over a long celebratory brunch. I was invited, technically, But my mother framed it as a family trip to meet Daniel's serious girlfriend, not as a birthday trip for me. I went. I sat at a table in a restaurant I hadn't chosen, in a city I hadn't picked, at a brunch organized entirely around my brother and his girlfriend. My mother gave a small toast to Daniel and Brianna's relationship and how happy she was to be meeting such lovely people. At no point during the meal did anyone mention that it was my 16th birthday, not once. It was my aunt who texted me from home, the only one who'd sent a card in the mail who finally acknowledged it. I read her text under the table and excused myself to the restroom so I could breathe for a moment without anyone seeing my face. My 21st birthday was quieter in its cruelty. Daniel had gotten engaged to Brianna the previous month, and the family was still in full celebration mode, floating on goodwill and future wedding planning excitement. My parents had organized an informal engagement dinner for the extended family at our house on the Saturday closest to my actual birthday. When I pointed out during a phone call that Saturday was my birthday, my mother paused and said, "Oh, I know, sweetie, but everyone is already coming in for this and we can't really reschedule. You understand, right? You can blow out a candle at the party." There was no candle. No one mentioned my birthday at the engagement dinner. I smiled and passed serving dishes and listened to relatives congratulate Daniel and Brianna. My cousin Andrea caught me alone in the kitchen at one point, filling water glasses, and quietly said, "Happy birthday, Rach. I know today's not really about you and I'm sorry." I told her I was fine. I had become very good at saying I was fine. There is something particular about being the one who is always fine. Families lean into it. They stop questioning it. Once you're established as the self-sufficient one, the low-maintenance one, the one who doesn't need much, the identity calcifies. You become useful in the way a reliable piece of furniture is useful. Nobody thinks about whether the furniture has feelings. It's just always there when you need it. My parents never said outright that they loved Daniel more. I don't think they believed they did. But love without attention is a theoretical concept. You can feel warmly towards someone and still consistently fail to show up for them. What they communicated through years of behavior was a clear, unspoken message. Daniel's milestones are urgent and real. Yours are flexible. I left for college at Penn State with a mix of relief and grief. Relief because the daily invisibility was easier to bear from a distance. Grief because distance didn't actually fix anything, it just made the absences during holidays more glaring and the forgotten birthdays somehow lonelier. I was no longer there to be accidentally overlooked. I was far away and still being overlooked, which required more effort on their part and none. I graduated with a degree in accounting and took a position at a regional firm in Pittsburgh 2 years after finishing school. I was 24. Building my professional life with the same quiet, stubborn diligence I had applied to everything since childhood. My parents called occasionally, asked surface-level questions about work, and spent most of the call updating me on Daniel's life. His new house, his promotion at his firm, Brianna's pregnancy, the gender reveal party they were already planning months in advance. I attended the gender reveal. I held the confetti popper my mother handed me and smiled when blue streamers exploded into the air and everyone cheered for a boy. My mother cried happy tears and squeezed Daniel's arm. My father shook his hand like he'd just won a championship. My birthday was 4 days later. Neither of them called. The inheritance changed everything, though not in the way inheritances usually do. My grandmother on my mother's side, who everyone called Nana Bev, passed away in the spring of my 28th year after a brief illness. She had been a constant in my life in a way my parents never fully were. The one who mailed birthday cards without fail, who called on the actual day, who asked specific questions about my work and remembered my answers. She was the only person in my family who treated my existence as notable. I was not prepared for what her estate attorney read during the will meeting. Her house went to my mother. Her jewelry and personal items were divided among her children. But a separate investment account, accumulated quietly over 30 years of careful saving, was designated entirely for me. Not split, not shared, just mine. $412,000 left to a granddaughter she had apparently been watching more closely than anyone knew. There was a letter included with the bequest, written in Nana Bevov's careful, looping handwriting. I will not share all of it here, but the sentence I have read more times than I can count said simply, "You have always deserved more celebration than you received, Rachel. Consider this a very belated birthday gift from someone who was paying attention." I sat in the estate attorney's office and read that sentence 4 times while the room blurred around me. My mother was seated 3 feet away. She did not look at me. I did not tell anyone what was in the letter. I thanked the attorney, drove home, and sat in my apartment for a long time thinking about what Nana Bev had seen that I had spent years convincing myself I was imagining. She had seen it. She had named it. And she had done something about it in the only way left available to her. My instinct was to call my mother immediately to say, "Did you know? Did she ever say anything to you?" But I stopped myself. I thought about every time I had shared good news and watched it land flat. I thought about the time I mentioned a promotion to my father, and he responded by telling me about Daniel's salary increase at his firm. I thought about calling home with the Penn State scholarship news and spending most of the call hearing about Daniel's college social life. I decided to say nothing about the inheritance. Not to my parents, not to Daniel, not to Brianna. I told my best friend Camille, who screamed so loudly in my living room that my downstairs neighbor knocked on the ceiling. I told her everything, the account amount, the letter, all of it. We cried together. That was enough. That was more than enough. Over the following months, I continued my life outwardly unchanged. I went to work, I paid my rent. I visited the family for the holidays and attended Daniel's son's first birthday party, where my parents rented an entire park pavilion and hired a face painter and a petting zoo. For a 1-year-old, I held my nephew, who was genuinely sweet and blameless in all of this, and I smiled for photos, and I drove home thinking about Nana Bev's letter. As my 29th birthday approached, I noticed the familiar signs immediately. The family group chat, which my mother ran with the organizational precision of a logistics company, was entirely occupied with planning Daniel and Brianna's 5th anniversary trip, which my parents had offered to fund as a gift. Discussion of destinations, hotel recommendations, and babysitting arrangements for my nephew filled the thread daily. My birthday was 11 days before their anniversary. No one mentioned it. 2 weeks before my birthday, my mother called to ask if I could take my nephew for the anniversary weekend so Daniel and Brianna could travel. She mentioned the dates. My birthday fell on the Friday of that weekend. I said I would check my schedule. She thanked me and spent the next 10 minutes discussing anniversary dinner reservations, then ended the call by saying I was such a thoughtful sister. I did not check my schedule. I had already made plans. I had spent the previous 4 months researching mountain properties in western North Carolina, a region I had visited once with Camille and immediately loved. The kind of landscape that felt nothing like Cedarville, nothing like Pittsburgh, nothing like any place associated with the version of myself that had spent years being quietly invisible. I had worked with a buyer's agent named Sandra, who specialized in vacation properties in the Asheville area, and together we had toured 6 properties virtually and 2 in person before I found the one. It was a 3-bedroom A-frame cabin on a wooded acre outside a small mountain town 40 minutes from Asheville. It had a stone fireplace, exposed beam ceilings, a wraparound deck overlooking a valley, and a small creek running along the eastern edge of the property. The price was $280,000. With Nana Bev's inheritance, I could put down enough to keep my monthly payment well within what I could comfortably manage on my own income. Sandra had called me 2 days before my birthday. "The sellers accepted your counteroffer," she said. "They want to close in 30 days. How does that sound?" I sat at my kitchen table in Pittsburgh and said, "That sounds perfect." "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You're going to love it up there." I signed the electronic acceptance documents that evening, alone in my apartment, birthday cards from Camille and 2 friends from work on my kitchen counter, nothing from my parents or Daniel. I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, clicked the signature fields one by one, and submitted the offer with the earnest money transfer at 7:43 in the evening of my 29th birthday. I did not call anyone. I opened Camille's card, which was funny and heartfelt and made me laugh out loud in an empty apartment, and I fell asleep that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like I had finally done something that could not be taken back or minimized or forgotten. Closing took 28 days. I drove to North Carolina on a Thursday, signed the final paperwork in a conference room with Sandra and the seller's attorney, received the keys, and drove 40 minutes up a mountain road to a cabin that now had my name on the deed. I stood on the deck and looked at the valley below and the ridgeline beyond it, and felt something crack open in my chest in the best possible way. I spent that first weekend doing almost nothing useful. I slept on an air mattress in the main bedroom. I made coffee in a pot I'd brought from Pittsburgh and drank it on the deck every morning wrapped in a fleece jacket while the fog lifted off the valley. I walked the creek path. I sat by the fireplace with a book and a candle. I called no one. I answered no texts except Camille's, who asked for updates with a level of vicarious excitement that made me love her even more than usual. Over the following 6 weeks, I drove down nearly every other weekend. I bought furniture carefully and over time, a solid wood bed frame, a sectional in a warm rust color, a dining table that could seat 6 when I eventually wanted company. I painted the kitchen a deep sage green. I hung Nana Bev's favorite landscape print above the fireplace, the one my mother had offered to sell at the estate sale before I quietly said I wanted it. The cabin was becoming mine in every visible and invisible way. There were framed photos of Camille and me, of 2 other close friends from college, of the view from the deck on a particularly perfect October morning I had captured on my phone. There was a bookshelf full of books I had been meaning to read for years. There was a small framed copy of the line from Nana Bev's letter. I had it typeset simply on cardstock, white text on a dark background. You have always deserved more celebration than you received. 7 weeks after closing, on a Sunday afternoon in late October with the leaves at their full peak color, I took 20 minutes of photographs. The deck with the valley behind it, orange and gold as far as I could see. The fireplace with a fire going. The kitchen with afternoon light coming through the window. The creek path with fallen leaves scattered across the stones. I was not planning to post them. I was documenting something for myself. The way you photograph something you know you will want to remember exactly as it was. Then I looked through them and thought, this is mine, and I'm not ashamed of it. And I'm done treating my own life like it needs to be kept quiet. I opened Instagram, selected 8 photos, wrote the caption, "Found my place, finally," and posted it before I could second guess myself. I drove home to Pittsburgh that evening with the radio on and my phone face down in the cup holder. It wasn't until I stopped for gas outside of Morgantown that I picked it up and saw the notifications. 47 likes, dozens of comments from friends and acquaintances expressing delight and asking questions. And then, at the bottom, loading in real time as I stood in a gas station parking lot in the dark, my mother, my father, and Daniel. My mother, Rachel, whose cabin is this? Are you visiting friends? This looks beautiful, call me. My father, where is this? How long have you been going up there? Is this a rental? Daniel, wait, is this yours? Did you buy a cabin? Why didn't you say anything? 3 more from my mother over the next hour, escalating in length and confusion, asking who had helped me, whether I consulted a financial advisor, whether the area was safe, whether I was renting it out. Not once, across any of the messages, was there a question about whether I was happy, whether it was what I'd always wanted, whether it was beautiful in person. The questions were all about the money, the logistics, the opacity of my decision-making. The questions were all about why I hadn't included them. By the time I got home, Daniel had also texted separately, "Mom and Dad are kind of freaking out." What's going on? I set my phone on the counter and made tea and sat with it for a while. The following Saturday, my parents drove to Pittsburgh. This was not something they did regularly. It had the quality of an emergency response, which told me everything about how they had processed the situation. They arrived at my apartment exactly on time, which was itself unusual enough to be notable. My mother brought a container of the pasta I had liked growing up, which I recognized as a peace offering dressed as a casual gesture. We sat at my kitchen table, the 3 of us, with coffee and the pasta neither of my parents had touched. My father had his hands around his mug like he needed something to hold on to. My mother's expression was carefully composed in the way it always was when she was managing her feelings in real time. My father spoke first. "So," he said, in the measured tone he used for conversations he had already rehearsed. "Tell us about this property." "It's a 3-bedroom A-frame in the Blue Ridge Mountains," I said. "About 40 minutes outside Asheville. I've been going up there on weekends since closing. I love it." "When did you close?" my mother asked. "About 7 weeks ago." The pause that followed had weight to it. My mother set down her coffee cup. 7 weeks. And you didn't mention it. No, I agreed. I didn't, Rachel, my father said, and I could hear him selecting his words carefully. I think what we're trying to understand is why you would make a decision this significant and not say a word to us. We're your family. We would have wanted to know. We might have had thoughts that would have helped. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, when was the last time you remembered my birthday without me reminding you? The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before it. My mother opened her mouth and closed it. My father frowned and started to say something about that not being the point. I kept going. I'm not asking to be difficult. I'm genuinely asking. Last year? The year before? I haven't gotten a call on my actual birthday in years. Last year you were coordinating Daniel's home renovation project and my birthday came and went and I got a text from you 4 days later that said, hope you had a good one. 4 days later. We've been busy, Rachel. Your brother has a child now, a mortgage, a lot happening. I know, I said. And the year before that, you were consumed with planning Daniel's promotion dinner. And the year before that, it was the anniversary party. There is always something happening with Daniel. There has always been something happening with Daniel. And I have always been the one who waits. My mother's composure slipped slightly. We love you equally. You know that. I know you believe that, I said, and I meant it without hostility. But love that consistently forgets my existence when Daniel needs something isn't equal love. It's theoretical love. And I stopped waiting for the theoretical version a long time ago. My father set down his mug. This is about more than birthdays. You're upset about a lifetime of. Yes, I said simply. I am. I've been upset about it since I was 9 years old, eating cereal alone on my birthday because Daniel had a baseball tournament in Erie. I've just stopped expecting that pointing it out would change anything. Something shifted in my father's expression. Not defensiveness this time. Something slower. The cabin, I continued, was purchased with an inheritance Nana Bev left me. She left it specifically to me, which I suspect some of you may have feelings about. She also left me a letter explaining why. And what she said in that letter was that I deserved more celebration than I had received, and she wanted to do something about it. I paused. She was the only one who ever reliably remembered my birthday. The only one who called every year on the actual day and asked me specific questions and actually listened to the answers. So when I had the means she gave me, I used it to build something for myself. Something that was mine. I didn't tell anyone because I have spent my entire life sharing my good news with people who respond by making it about Daniel. My mother had tears on her face by this point. She was not a woman who cried easily, and I noticed it without moving toward it. That isn't fair, she said quietly. Mom, I said with more gentleness than I expected to feel. When I got the accounting certification I worked for 2 years to pass, you called to tell me about Daniel's promotion. When I got a merit bonus at work 3 years ago, Dad asked if I had considered applying to a larger firm the way Daniel had. I am not making these things up. I have been paying attention my whole life because I had to, because no one else was. My father looked at the table. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of the rehearsed tone. I don't think we meant to do this. I know, I said. That might be the saddest part. We sat with that for a while. Daniel called that evening. Not a text, an actual call, which was unusual enough that I almost didn't answer. When I did, he was quiet for a moment and then said, I read through the family chat, and I thought about what you said at the table, what Mom told me you said, and I want to hear it from you. What was it actually like? Growing up the way you did while I was, the center of everything? I offered. He exhaled. Yeah. I told him. Not all of it, not every incident, but enough. The 9th birthday, the 16th, the 21st, the pasta my mother used to make him every year on his birthday, because it was his favorite, which she had never once made for mine. He listened without interrupting, which I had not expected. I didn't notice, he said when I was done. I genuinely didn't notice. And I know that's not an excuse. but I want you to know I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear all of this. I heard it. I believed him. Not because he was perfect, or because one conversation undoes decades of imbalance, but because his voice had the quality of someone sitting with something uncomfortable and choosing not to leave it. "The cabin sounds incredible," he said after a moment. "Mom showed me the photos, the deck especially. It's better in person," I told him. "I'd like to see it someday, if you ever want that." I said I would think about it. And I meant it. My mother called 3 days later. She asked if I could talk and I said yes, and she spoke for a long time, carefully, with the halting quality of someone reading from notes she had made to make sure she didn't miss anything. She said she had been thinking about the things I had named. She said she knew sorry wasn't enough and she wasn't going to make it the whole conversation. She asked me specific questions about the cabin, about the town nearby, about whether I had met my neighbors yet. She asked what my favorite part of it was. She listened to the answers. At the end of the call, she said, "Your birthday was 7 weeks ago and I missed it. Again. I'm sorry." I said thank you. I did not say it was fine. It was not fine. But it was a beginning. 2 weeks later, Camille came to the cabin for a long weekend. She brought wine, good cheese, a new wind chime for the deck, and a birthday card she had been holding for 2 months because she wanted to give it to me in person at the cabin. It was handmade, with a photograph she had taken of the two of us years ago printed on the front, and inside she had written, "This is the birthday present. The cabin, the life, the choosing yourself. That's the gift. I'm just the one who got to watch." We hiked to a waterfall 20 minutes from the cabin. We cooked elaborate meals and ate them on the deck in the cold mountain air wrapped in blankets. We sat by the fireplace until 2 in the morning talking about nothing and everything the way you only can with someone who has known you long enough to know which silences are comfortable and which ones mean something. On the last morning, I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and watched fog move through the valley below. The leaves were mostly gone by then, and the ridgeline was bare, and the creek was higher from recent rain. Everything was still and gray and completely beautiful in its quietness. I had spent most of my life waiting to be seen clearly by the people who were supposed to know me best. I had brought my best accomplishments to the table over and watched them go unacknowledged while my brother's ordinary moments were treated as cause for community-wide celebration. And I had kept showing up, kept trying, kept making myself available in the hope that something would eventually shift. What shifted in the end wasn't them. It was me. I stopped orienting my sense of worth around their capacity to perceive it. I stopped saving my good news for people who would dilute it. I stopped treating my own milestones as things that needed to wait for permission or acknowledgement to be real. The cabin is real. The deed has my name on it. The morning light comes through the bedroom window at an angle that makes the wooden floors glow, and the fireplace works perfectly, and there are neighbors 2 properties over named Frank and Carol who leave vegetables from their garden on my porch when they know I'm coming up for the weekend. I have built something here and it is entirely mine, and it costs nothing in the currency of other people's approval. If you are watching this and you know what it feels like to be the one who is always fine, the one who adjusts, the one who adjusts, the one who waits, I want you to hear this directly. Your milestones do not need an audience to be real. Your achievements do not require the right people to acknowledge them before they count. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining yourself to people who have demonstrated they are not listening and start building something quietly in the direction of your own joy. You don't have to burn anything down. You don't have to make a speech. You just have to stop waiting for a celebration that isn't coming and throw the party yourself, even if it looks like a solitary cup of coffee on a mountain deck in the morning fog. That's where I'll be this weekend. And the one after that. And probably many, many more after that. If this story felt familiar to you in any way, leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they are allowed to take up space in their own life, please share this with them. Subscribe if you want to stay around. I have more to say. I'm just getting started. There is a version of Rachel's story that ends the moment she clicks submit on that offer document at 7:43 in the evening of her forgotten birthday. And in many ways, that is where the real story begins. Not with a confrontation, not with an apology, but with a single private act of self-recognition that no one could take back or talk her out of. What happened to Rachel over those 29 years wasn't random, and it wasn't accidental in the way her parents wanted to believe. It was the accumulated result of 1,000 small choices. Choices to prioritize one child's comfort over another's, to treat one person's needs as urgent and another's as flexible, to let "she's fine" become a reason to stop looking. Every cause produced an effect. The cereal eaten alone on a 9th birthday produced a teenager who stopped bouncing down the stairs in the morning. The teenager who lowered her expectations produced the young woman who learned to say, "I'm fine," so fluently that the people around her believed it. And the young woman who was always fine produced a version of herself that eventually had to decide, keep waiting or start building. She chose to build. That choice was not a reaction born of bitterness, even though bitterness would have been understandable. It was something quieter and more durable, a decision rooted in self-respect, in the recognition that her worth was not going to be discovered by the people who had been looking past her for decades. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She simply stopped outsourcing her own celebration to people who had demonstrated, consistently and without malice, that they were not capable of providing it. This is what intelligence looks like when it turns inward. Rachel was professionally accomplished. She passed certifications, earned bonuses, built a reputation at her firm. But the real intelligence in her story is the kind that is harder to develop and more valuable once you have it. The ability to see a situation clearly without flinching, to name what is actually happening rather than the more comfortable story, and to act from that clarity rather than from the hope that clarity will eventually arrive in someone else's mind. And there is a form of moral courage in what she did at that kitchen table. Not the loud kind, not the kind that performs for an audience. The kind that simply tells the truth when it would have been easier, and historically more practiced, to smooth things over and go home feeling small. She did not accuse, she did not exaggerate, she named specific moments, specific years, specific words. She gave her parents the gift of precision, which is a harder gift to dismiss than vague hurt feelings. The cabin is not a symbol of revenge, it is a symbol of cause and effect operating in someone's favor for once. The grandmother who paid attention produced a granddaughter who felt seen. The granddaughter who felt seen by one person learned, slowly, that being seen was possible. The inheritance was the material form of that lesson. Here is proof that someone watched, someone valued, someone decided to say so in the only permanent language available to her. What you build when no one is watching is yours in a way that nothing given to you can ever fully be. Rachel built a career in the quiet years. She built self-sufficiency. She built the capacity to sit alone in an empty cabin on an air mattress and feel something other than lonely. All of that became the foundation for a life that did not require external permission to be real. If there is a single thing worth carrying out of her story, it is this. The people who consistently fail to see you are not the authority on whether you are worth seeing. Their inattention is information about their limitations, not a verdict on your value. The most resilient thing a person can do is to stop appealing to a court that has already shown it will not rule in their favor, and start building something in a direction the verdict cannot reach.